A traditional way of scouting for and handling protest fragmentation, such as attached to a particular terminal or turbulent area, is PCO alternation with a form of conceptual processing. And we kind of brought this up in the first, during level 0, concept of conceptual processing. This generally assists the seeker to free up their considerations or increase their tolerance. So we're kind of in treating one area, for example, we're trying to increase tolerance and acceptance and so forth. We alternate. What about blank might you protest, and what about blank could you accept? So we're alternating between those two PCL and just seeing what comes up. We're not actually circling for any specific response. We're simply scouting, to get a better handle for what needs to be perhaps processed using other methods as well. Most things, however, can be kind of pulled apart with treating, again, alternation, acceptance, rejection, or acceptance and protest. So, enforced inhibition. Now, when we're prevented from having or doing or being something, often produces what we call dramatizations. It's visible behaviors of protest. So this could actually manifest in two ways. For one, there's the obvious, protest that results from being denied something and we still want it. And then there's the other side of this where this something is denied for so long that we may suddenly consider it that it's bad and we no longer want it. But there's still a need to connect with it on some channel, even if the only solution is to protest against what we originally wanted, but then we're denied. Again, because self is always self-correcting. Self always is right. So if something is denied for too long, we'll just kind of tell ourselves we don't want it. But of course, again, this is outside of self-determination. It's a reaction to something happening, reaction from something being withheld from us, for example. So protesting is it's a very specific type of communication outflow. Whatever that communication may be, it's quite pointedly directed at a target recipient, involving a specific terminal. So here we see one of many instances where material from our previous lessons on communication are again going to reoccur here, regarding acceptance and rejection. So that's why communication being fundamental. So if you struggle a lot with level 0, it's not necessarily going to get easier. So so just kind of work with that. The final process given here for the area is using, and I talked about this earlier, using actualized awareness to essentially disintegrate fragmentation directly. By being able to take an elevated state of actualized awareness and spotting something, we're essentially using our spiritual ability to uncreate or disintegrate something. I mean, now the theory behind all that is it's secondary to the application and the effectiveness of, again, this process. There's all kinds of theory, but let's just consider that whatever we don't want around us or in our space is in some way being protested against. So even that which we're withdrawing from is in some way being protested against. Its very existence we are protesting, but there is still a thing there to be protested about. In that case, we aren't traditionally uncreating what we don't like in everyday life, and we're not usually even uncreating the tendencies that build up of behind us not liking it at will. Again, everything starts to run on automation. So the final process here, get the concept of protesting the existence of blank. Now admire the existence of blank. Get the concept of you creating the existence of blank. And you would just kind of keep cycling through those, getting a greater reality and kind of sense on that. And again, whatever the blank is, the terminal or whatever the area is in question there. You just run it repeatedly on something you're protesting, protesting the existence of, even if it's not, concerning the type of the dramatization you might see, the marching and shouting and the picketing type of protest that we're quick to associate with this idea. There's other areas that we've protested in our lives that maybe we haven't brought to such extremes, that school, work, family, social governance. These are all elements we experience as reality, and so protest is really anything concerning what we strongly dislike or avoid. So now, to be systematically effective, protest processing must be handled on the direct existence of something, and not a something about something. So if you process a dirt scuff on your shoe, the protest is the existence of the scuff and not the fact that the shoes have a scuff on them. That's just a basic example there. So this systematic approach, it helps us to separate our considerations about what a thing is, as opposed to focusing on the fragmented associations directly. So the fragmentation here would make us more inclined to eventually not like our shoes, for example. If that fragmentation continued and the protest of it wasn't handled, eventually we would kind of develop some kind of automatic response about, and eventually, if in extreme measures, I mean, usually this isn't such a thing, in our day-to-day life with this, but as an example, something that we're protesting like that and don't like, for example, those shoes at that point, if left unhandled and built upon as a chain of fragmentation, it becomes essentially an aspect about, like an automatic response or fragmented concept develops about the whole area of shoes in general. And so any of the areas that we're having issues with in this lifetime, just consider the compounded layers of the kind of interactions and incidents that would be related to that. And generally the ones prior to this universe even are a lot more high powered. We're talking about beings that had the abilities to do a lot more than what is being demonstrated now. Now it's really more about getting people stuck in a body, and then what you can do to a body, and by their entire sense of beingness being attached and fixed to that body, the threats and the conditions of the body and maintaining one can be used essentially to control the alpha spirit, because the alpha spirit has been convinced now that it's dependent on the human condition to maintain any sense of beingness, which of course we know is not the case. So now, the idea of, we're talking about get the concept of protesting, and then in the PCL, the word, that's the key word there, is now admire the existence of something. That admiration step is likely to require a little bit of, some build-up, with each cycle through the PCLs, some build-up, to get a real good sense of it, any reality on being able to admire it, So at first the seeker might just simply acknowledge, okay, the existence of the thing and build up just a kind of a mediocre base of acceptance. And then with each pass, you try to, get the sense of admiring it much more than you were before. And much like all the other types of processing we do, when we do this in a self-determined systematic session, our end goal, for example, with defragmenting what we're protesting, is not to, just, bend over and take it, so to speak, or to just, when we mean acceptance, we mean to be able to accept the tolerance, to be able to tolerate the existence and confront the existence of something as it is, as opposed to withdrawing from it or having some other inclination, automatically attached or associated to it, as a reactive or a compulsive thing. What an individual ultimately decides to do or not do, or how they feel, or what they choose to create thereafter, that ultimately becomes the individual's free choice. But in order to have that freedom of choice, it requires basically working back and forth any of these tendencies until they've been completely flattened and cleaned. And so we're basically going from one extreme to another in order to process in a direction that's usually indicated by one of the PCL. Eventually, what are you protesting about, and what do you accept or willing to accept? Ultimately, an endpoint on that would be, that an individual is truly and self-honestly no longer protesting that something exists and has the tolerance and ability to accept it, fully as it is. So again, working up on a gradient scale. Once something, in the individual, when we say accept and tolerate, if an individual actually ultimately, and we'll get into the idea of change here also within level 1, but if an individual wants to change something, change something in reality, change something in their environment, change something about themselves, ultimately the first thing is to accept that it exists. So without the actual point of accepting something exists, it cannot be changed. If it's already being rejected, if it's already being protested against, if it's already being handled as something that doesn't want to, an individual doesn't want to deal with, well, there's no hope of changing that. So the first step to changing or improving something is to first actually acknowledge and recognize what it is, and then, apply the change. So, and that just brings us into, again, change in motion, the next point here in our lesson. So, as the seeker expects to advance upon the pathway, their willingness to change must be increased. Now, when things are difficult, there's a tendency to kind of clamp down and resist change in order to avoid things getting worse. And this is, even dramatized by the body automatically when it's hurt. The individual is trying to hold things in place, and things start to happen more compulsively. It becomes difficult to change for the better. So, speaking again on the metaphysical, we talked about the alpha spirit itself, like a static point of awareness that can, it exists remote from this existence, but it has also shared a creative existence, with other alpha spirits for quite some time, and it can also develop, and we talked about tolerance and acceptance. It can develop a distaste for motion, and to the extent, the control of motion. So to some degree, there is a tendency to unknowingly hold everything still as a protective defense mechanism against danger or other harmful effects. Likewise, a being tends to keep things from going away as a compulsive, unknowing, repetitive remedy for the experience of loss. So, we shift here now to, basically we've talked about subjective processing. At this point, we shift now to objective processing, to handle some of the areas, because we talked about how we alternate that. And here we're going to deal with change and no change. So in each of these cycles, you do them like 5 times on the same object, and then when you've done all 3 on the same object, you choose a different object and do them again 5 times each. So there's three steps here, and let's just so in the first step is always to spot. So in each of the 3 parts, the first step is always to spot, and the second is to contact. Now, we're demonstrating this. We're going to demonstrate this first with objective processing. So we're going to spot an object, and then we're going to place our hands on it. And when we are treating the same handling of defragmentation and compulsive behavior and subjective processing, we're essentially doing the same thing, because fragmentation is actually energetic mass. It's energetic. It's our awareness, our zoo, our spiritual energy fragmented and accumulated and solidified and compactified as energetic mass. It's enough. It's an energy that's condensed enough that it has mass. So when we're talking about fragmentation, we're talking about dealing with terminals and things with mass, anyways, because the fragmentation itself has mass. So spotting and contacting are the same steps that we have for handling anything that we're going to treat in processing. Now, there's a variation for each one of these, and let's see, hold it still. Might have to get a new marker. And I think that's the end of our marker, but I'm pretty sure that's still showing up for everyone over there in our camera. Oh, and then I'll explain each one of these for each one, because this is really three separate parts, and so which would be labeled A, B, and C in your text, and then each of them have 4 steps. So the first one, spot the object, place your hands on it, hold it absolutely still, decide when to let go, and then take your hands off. Then the B step here, spot the object, place your hands on it, get a sense of keeping it from going away, decide when to let go, and take your hands off of it. And then the C step, spot the object, place your hands on it, decide to move it, decide where to move it to it at the exact spot you had decided on, and then take your hands off. So this is these steps. You'd run each of the cycles. So spotting the object and putting hands on it, and then each of these as a cycle. 5 times on an object, and then go to the next object, do it 5 times again, get a sense of doing this. Now, although this may not be explained in your text, the same kind of practice can be done. This is what we do to get a handle of anything on a mental level as well with systemology. So even if it isn't worded the same way, when we do some of our practices, we're essentially duplicating this process, but of course, doing it subjectively instead of with objects. So, excuse me, this same systematic processing formula as an objective process can also be applied to the body. For example, using your hands to grab your right leg and hold it absolutely still. Then doing the same with the other cycles. So intending to keep it from going away, and then finally deciding to move it, using your hands to lift it up and down. Note that to hold it still and keep it from going away only appear the same, kind of at a visible level. The key difference is that in the second one, our intention also includes resisting any of the efforts to move away while holding it there. So essentially our intention is to stop its effort to change or move. And then of course, when I put change in parentheses here because like for example, when we're doing creativeness processing, imaginative work, we're taking something that's reactive. We take a reactive image or a reactive picture or something that's particularly turbulent and handle it in a certain way. We spot it, contact what it is. We then create our own copy of it, and part of that, and we practice these same steps with it, including changing it, like altering its color to again validate that it is our creation, not the reactive image, and so forth. And this develops basically our ability to manage, self-determine not only the mental imagery that's taking place in the mind, but any of the reactive and associative, like imprinting, that is accumulated, because imprinting is also a form of fragmentation. So, and you can practice this on other parts of the body too. In some ways, it starts to establish a habit of controlling the body more deliberately or intentionally. Specifically in this case, an individual is knowingly practicing an otherwise automatic, unknowing reaction to, for example, hold an injured or painful part of the body. So as with other objective processing and systemology, this is just one formula. It's a formula that can have many applications, and there's also the advanced mental version of the exercise, and it's practiced basically much in the same way as the physical, except the seeker reaches mentally rather than with the body. So in the third step, rather than moving the object, the PCL is to make it more solid. And this is done more by intention, and basically getting a sense of it conceptually. So, so when we're bringing this into play, deciding to move something or whatnot, we're starting to talk about change. So before we were talking in this lesson on handling humanity, we were talking about protest, communication and protest, and then now we're starting to get more into, for example, change in motion. So in systematic processing, change is, we consider it like a channel. It's not itself a terminal. It's a channel between self and many potential people and places and objects. The communications on this channel involve, those three basic circuits that we've already described. So when we process change, we actually demonstrate a slightly expanded version of these circuits. So in circuit 1, what would you be willing to change in another person? In circuit 2A, what would you be willing to allow someone to change in you? In circuit 2B, what would you be willing to have another person change in themselves? And in circuit 3, what would you be willing to have another person change in others? And then here we also include in your text, whether it's Pathway to Ascension Volume 1, or if you're using Handling Humanity, Systemology, Professional Course Booklet number 4, we introduce Circuit 0, which is basically concerns self. Circuit 0 as the alpha spirit to self. So what would you be willing to change in yourself? So this is the first time we really introduce Circuit 0 in the professional course. It's not so much a communication flow to others, but basically like self to self. In this case, self is always the terminal. So in systemology, this is sometimes referred to as like a beingness postulate or an alpha thought, where self is directing a decision that something is, or about how something will either be or not be, to itself, and basically that's becoming its reality agreement. So, in the end, all the areas of processing are ultimately handling one's own postulates. In essence, it's the level of alpha thought that we're working up to reaching and mastering with the pathway. Because if we were really able to change our mind completely from within the human condition, we wouldn't remain in this state. So there are obviously some barriers of fragmentation that need to be cleared for this to be possible again. So to continue demonstrating how to process the area of change, we'll just utilize if you remember in lesson 2, we talked about analytical recall. So each circuit is treated in its own process containing 2 PCL. And the PCL are alternated repeatedly until a seeker cannot just readily access more answers. So then you go to the next process and do the same. And after all 4 are completely run, and cycle them again and see if any new answers are produced. So in the first one, the 2 alternating PCL, recall changing something, recall stopping something from changing. The second set, recall someone changing something, recall someone stopping something from changing. The third set, recall society changing, recall society resisting change. And the fourth set, which is really the 0 circuit, recall changing yourself and recall stopping yourself from changing. So now if we treat this a little more conceptually, we can follow the same basic instruction from these previous processes. And notice too, we're going to use the words could and would to basically expand our range of free consideration as opposed to recall. In lieu of could and would, and that developed from imaginative. We used to have originally in 2020, we had 2 main kind of ways of processing, one involving recalling something and one, something that one could recall and remembering that actually happened, and then one involving imagining something or something conceptually. And so rather than saying imagine whatever, here the first set says what could you change and what would you leave unchanged. The second, what could change you and what would leave you unchanged. The third, what could change others and what would leave others unchanged. And the fourth, 0 circuit, what could you change about yourself and what would you leave unchanged about yourself. If you want some additional objective processing in this area, since it is in your textbook, here we have look around the room, spot something you would be willing and able to change, and then change it. Spot something you find acceptable to remain the same, and then leave it unchanged. And you're doing that intentionally. So when you see something, you actually, I'll permit that to be where it is, and so, make sure you're actually following through the steps with intention, not just, okay, that's fine there, and whatever. So finally, you can run these ones as a process within this area. There's 4 PCL. What must be changed, what must not be changed, what is acceptable to leave uncontrolled, and what can you control comfortably. So here we really just have this. This is basically the entry point to directly handling the human condition. So we've emphasized protest and change. Total defragmentation in these areas will likely take a second pass through the professional course, possibly several cycles through the processing of level lesson 4, level 1, just itself. So the ultimate point we're reaching for in this area would include the elimination of any compulsive tendencies in the area of protest and change. So example, a freedom from the need to change people or prevent them from changing in order to find them more acceptable. And on the other side, an increased willingness to allow change in one's environment or among others without feeling a need to be involved. So these would just be some of the endpoints or the endpoint realizations that an individual might achieve from running through these kind of processes long enough as you work through this area. So in the next course, in the next lesson, or this lesson, but after the break, we'll get into more about human problems.
The Joshua Tree Endpoint JFI publication, in conjunction with Mardukite Academy and the Systemology Society, present the single greatest breakthrough of the 21st century for all humanity. The perfection of a new standard systemology, a complete map for the way out from the bottom to the top, and your key to being an ascended master in this lifetime. Everything you need is contained in 3 progressive, self-guiding courses: the Fundamentals of Systemology Basic Course, the Pathway to Ascension Professional Course, and the Keys to the Kingdom Advanced Training Course. and each should be studied and applied in their intended sequence and order as displayed in this video. All 3 courses combined are available as 5 standard hardcover volumes, but also as 33 installments, since each single course lesson is also available individually as a pocket-sized manual. The Fundamentals of Systemology basic course includes Being More Than Human, Realities in Agreement, Windows to Experience, Ancient Systemology, A History of Systemology, and Systemology Processing. The Pathway to Ascension professional course, including processing levels 0 through 6, includes in Volume 1, Increasing Awareness, Thought and Emotion, Clear Communication, Handling Humanity, Free Your Spirit, Escaping Spirit Traps, Eliminating Barriers, and Conquest of Illusion. The Pathway to Ascension Volume 2 includes Confronting the Past, Lifting the Veils, Spiritual Implants, Games and Universes, Spiritual Energy, Spiritual Machinery, The Arcs of Infinity, and Alpha Thought. The Keys to the Kingdom AT Advanced Training Course for Processing Level 7 in Volume 1 includes The Secret of Universes, Games Goals and Purposes, The Jewel of Knowledge, Implanted Universes, and the supplementals Systemology Biofeedback and Systemology Procedures. The Keys to the Kingdom AT Advanced Training Course for Processing Level 8 in Volume 2 includes Entities and Fragments, Spiritual Perception, Mastering Ascension, Advancing Systemology, and the AT Supplement Systemology Piloting. All titles are available from your favorite bookseller. Explore new standard systemology today, and may you never be the same.